I'm Shireen Bhan. The top story tonight, it is the 8th day of the nationwide lockdown and the number of coronavirus cases in India has risen to over 1,600. Active cases stand at over 1,400. 132 people have recovered. The outbreak has claimed 38 lives so far. This is according to the Health Ministry's website as of 4:30 this evening. Almost 48,000 tests have been conducted, utilising 38% of India's testing capacity. 816 samples were tested at private labs on Tuesday, and so far 51 private labs have been approved to conduct COVID testing. Maharashtra and Kerala have been the worst-hit states in terms of the number of cases. According to the Maharashtra government, 351 cases have been detected so far. The number of active cases stands at 302. Total recoveries are 39. 10 people have died from the infection. In Kerala, the number of confirmed cases now stands at 265. The state has tested over 7,400 samples. 6,300 of these have tested negative. Also, over 1.6 lakh people in the state are under surveillance. Around 660 have been admitted to isolation facilities. Tamil Nadu has seen a sudden surge in the number of cases. According to the National Health Mission, 110 new cases have been reported across 15 districts. This brings the state's total count to 234. In New Delhi, the number of positive cases has risen to 120. Delhi's Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal has said the government will give an ex gratia 1 crore rupees to the family of any healthcare or sanitation worker who dies while fighting the outbreak. As the stress on the healthcare system increases, a Nagpur-based doctor has moved the Supreme Court seeking WHO-graded protective gear for healthcare professionals across the country. The court has asked the centre to respond to the plea by next week. India's Home Ministry has written to states and union territories asking them to strictly enforce the lockdown in both letter and spirit. The letter points out that some administrations have allowed more exemptions to the lockdowns than has been prescribed by the centre. It says such actions will defeat the very purpose of the lockdown, which is to stop the spread of the virus. Well, the new financial year has not begun on a great note for the Lal Street. Weak global cues and jitters over a spike in the number of coronavirus cases over the last few days had investors on edge. The indices giving up all the gains that they'd clocked on Tuesday. The Nifty and the Sensex dropped over 4% each, with the Sensex plunging 1,200 points and the Nifty giving up 344 points. Both these indices are now at one-week lows. Financials and IT stocks led the fall. The Nifty Bank fell nearly 5% over the day, and the IT index was down over 5.5%. It is not just India. It has been a weak session for global markets. Key Asian markets were in the red, with Japan's Nikkei down over 4%, Hang Seng down 2%, China's Shanghai Composite falling 0.5%. This weakness was mirrored across Europe, with the FTSE in London, the French CAC and the German DAX also down. Wall Street has opened sharply lower following the slump in global markets. Dow has opened over 600 points lower after Trump warned of another very painful 2 weeks due to the coronavirus. The Dow and the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq are between 2 to 3% in the red. The White House has projected between 100,000 to 240,000 virus-related deaths in the U.S. That is the latest on the global market. Speaking of the grim news from the U.S., the number of coronavirus cases in the state of New York has seen an alarming jump of 14% overnight. The state now has over 75,795 cases and has recorded 1,550 deaths. These new cases make New York the coronavirus epicenter of the world, surpassing the number of cases that were recorded in China's Hubei province. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, said that they were dealing with a warlike situation. He went on to say that the outbreak in New York may not peak for another 3 weeks, and it was extremely important for people to stay vigilant and isolated. Cuomo also said he wanted to move health workers from unfilled hospitals in the state into beleaguered hospitals in New York City. The state has placed an order for 17,000 ventilators from China. As the world grapples with a breakthrough for the coronavirus, the medical community has been busy working on finding a vaccine to prevent this virus from becoming a pandemic. The WHO has gone on record saying it does not expect a vaccine to be ready for at least 18 months. More than 35 companies and academic institutions have entered the race to create such a vaccine. And as of the 20th of March, the WHO website says that there are more than 40 vaccine candidates that are in various stages of development. Global pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson says it had selected the lead candidate vaccine for the novel coronavirus. It began work on the vaccine in January using the same technology that it used to develop a vaccine for Ebola. It expects to move to human trials by September and says that the vaccine could be ready for emergency use by early next year. Well, joining us now to take us through the company's efforts at producing this vaccine and the timelines that it is working with, we're joined by Paul Stoffels, the Chief Scientific Officer at Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Stoffels, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Before I talk to you about your efforts with a vaccine for the coronavirus, let me ask you about what you make of the numbers that we're seeing globally, especially when we talk about Europe and the US, specifically New York. Does this indicate that we're anywhere close to a peak or that the phase of acceleration continues?
Well, at the moment, on a global scale, the pace of acceleration continues. Let's say it goes as a wave over the world, and it has the number of infected going up, the number of deaths going up, and then it's as we have seen in China, it's slowing down and it disappears. So it's very solid action needs to be taken by governments, and that is actually happening. And I can only follow your advice and follow the government's advice that make sure you follow the guidance, because it's very important for you and your families that to prevent corona. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And yes, governments across the world are dealing with putting restrictions in place, travel restrictions, movement restrictions, people restrictions, in the hope to curb the contagion. But Mr. Stoffels, let me ask you specifically about the research that you've done at Johnson & Johnson on the coronavirus itself. What makes it so deadly? And how would you respond to what people are speculating on why the virus seems to be acting very differently in developed parts of the world versus the less developed parts of the world? How would you explain that?
Well, I think it's not explainable at the moment, but it might be a matter of exposure, that there is less exposure so far in the developing world in many of the countries in the south, and therefore it's not there. It might have something to do with temperature or nature, but most probably not. This is a quite aggressive virus. And why is it so deadly? Especially because it infects so fast and it goes so fast over the world. It is a deadly virus, but in the 1 to 3% of the cases die. But at the same time, it goes so fast and it touches so many people that's why this is such a deadly virus over the world. We have never seen this before, that a virus goes so fast and so deadly over the world.
Mm-hmm. Never seen a spread like this before. But I want to pick up on the point that you made, and I understand that there is no conclusive evidence to suggest whether this virus is in fact heat sensitive or not. But does your research show you any indication that there is a heat sensitivity that could get this virus to act differently where temperatures are higher? What I've been given to understand that it is unstable above 32 degrees centigrade. Does your research point to anything like that conclusively?
No, we don't have that type of research, but I wouldn't gamble on that. I would take the same measures as the West and the North is doing now to make sure that you prevent in other parts of the world, because we don't know, and you should not take the risk in other parts of the world not to take the right actions to implement quarantine and making sure that you keep control on the virus, because there is absolutely no certainty that this is going to behave different in other parts of the world. Mm-mm.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, that goes without saying that we do need to put those measures in place. What are the vulnerabilities of this virus? You talked about why this virus is so deadly, but for a layperson, you know, what do you believe are the vulnerabilities of the virus, which hopefully your vaccine will be able to exploit?
Well, the virus infects a lot of people, and it has the key to attack the lungs in especially adults and elderly people. It has a very particular link into getting into the cells in the lungs, and therefore it is so deadly. And especially in people who have somewhat decreased immunity when they get older, of other people with immune diseases like immune depression or people with oncology diseases, etc., it will be very challenging for those people, their bodies to defend. And that's why they need to be protected as the first people. So let's make sure that's happening continuously. The virus is tackling the lung, very significant hypoxia, pneumonia, viral pneumonia, and that causes reduces the death rate of what this virus can do, but it's especially the numbers which are so huge and the overwhelming of the healthcare system where they can't cope with it. If there's so many people sick who need intensive care and oxygen, there are just not enough respirators in the world at the moment to deal with it. And that is going to be the most important reason why people will die, is the lack of healthcare infrastructure to deal with so many people. And that's where everywhere in the world people say flatten the curve, make sure not more people get infected so that you prevent them from having to need intensive care.
Yes, flattening the curve is the imperative. Take me through the efforts on the vaccine. We're given to understand that you might go into trials closer to the end of the year, between September to November is what I'm given to understand. Take me through the efforts on that front.
Well, we started with our vaccine 15th of January when we got the code from the Chinese researchers. But now we are 1st of April. We have selected our lead candidate. We are working very hard now to get it into the clinic, and that will happen by early September. And between early September and end of the year, we are going to generate already a lot of new data and in the clinic, hopefully showing first safety, immunogenicity, and then later, early next year, hopefully getting to clinical efficacy. And that's a very accelerated path getting into the clinic.
Okay, so between early September to the end of the year, you hope that you will have enough of a breakthrough with this candidate that you're working on, which I understand is on the same Ebola platform that you worked on previously.
Yes, that learns us a lot. We have been, we use the same vaccine platform, the vector, which we use for COVID-19 now. We use that in HIV, in Ebola, in Zika, and RSV. And so 4 times we went from a virus to a vaccine, getting it tested in animals, getting it tested in humans, and scaled it up. And so we know the platform very well, and we can plan very accurately and carefully now on what do we need to do when in order to reach that timeline. And so we have vaccinated 50,000 people with the vaccine, which gives in the other diseases where we know already a lot of the safety and how it works. So that gives us reasonable comfort that we can get there within a certain time frame, as I said, early next year, with clinical data, as well as the first batches of vaccine, which we can manufacture in the meantime.
So, Mr. Stoffels, before I let you go, you said your work began in January on a possible breakthrough to deal with the coronavirus. What have you been able to, in the process of isolating the virus, etc., what have you been able to tell specifically about what this virus is susceptible to, and hence the breakthrough that you will be able to arrive at?
Well, we worked 15 years ago on corona antibodies with SARS, as well as a corona vaccine in animals. And so that was the early stages where we learned that we have to focus on the spike protein, which is the spike, the surface of the corona. And that is where we knew already what we had to do. This was a different virus, but with a similar similar structure, and we knew where we had to go. So when we had the genetic code from China, when that was published by the researchers, our researchers in the lab could create that spike, and from that could generate the first versions of the vaccine. We did 10 different versions, so to make sure that we didn't miss anything. All were tested in animals, and we were able to get to the selection of the right one. Selection on efficacy, but also selection on manufacturing. We have a manufacturing platform which can produce hundreds of millions of vaccines, and the vaccine has to be producible as well as safe, as well as giving immune protection for people.
Well, we wish you the very best of luck, Mr. Stoffels. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 and explaining to us what Johnson & Johnson is doing. We hope that you do and get to the trial stage, and we do hope that we have a breakthrough by the end of the year. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. Well, from one exclusive to another, Indian pharmaceutical companies are also in the race to produce a vaccine against COVID-19. Pune-based Serum Institute of India has partnered with American biotechnology firm Codagenics to develop such a vaccine and expects to be ready by early 2022. To discuss Serum Institute's progress and the efforts in the global battle against COVID-19, we're joined by Adar Poonawalla, the CEO of Serum Institute of India. Adar, many thanks for joining us. I was just speaking with the Chief Scientific Officer at Johnson & Johnson. I don't know if you heard that conversation, but take me through your efforts and what you're hearing from your fraternity around the world on being able to arrive at a breakthrough and being able to arrive at one this year itself.
Well, there's been Shireen, some very good developments on that front, which I'll share with you. It does take 6 to 7 years normally to make a vaccine. I think we should also be able to go into human trials by the end of this year, because we're entering into animal studies in about 3 weeks from today. So that's very encouraging news, and I can revise my earlier guesstimate from 2022 to maybe, early next year. So that's certainly good news. And I just was with my team today earlier on, and that's what I wanted to share with you. That's an update. And I think, what the tricky part has always been the regulatory framework, but now we've all come together so well, working and battling this out together, that all the regulatory approvals, all that will be, shrinking the time down from 3 or 4 years to, just under 1 year.
Okay, so that's important information that you're giving us, that you have been able to move forward or advance the process itself. You're saying that versus 2022, you could have a vaccine ready by next year, early next year.
Yes, but having said that, Shireen, I must make it very clear, whether it's Johnson or it's us or anyone else, these vaccines are going to still have to go through human trials, which you heard the other gentleman talk about, and so we're going to do it. So we still don't know if it's going to work. These are just the timelines that if it works, then these are the timelines that we have disclosed that will be possible to launch it. But this is a big if. It's a novel virus. It's the first time we're making these vaccines. So we'll have to see. And the other challenge, of course, is manufacturing it at a high scale, low cost, to make it available to everyone. And not many people have a lot of experience in that. And so we'll all have to, the community will have to work together and partner further, even for manufacturing.
Well, that is the expertise that you enjoy, manufacturing at scale and low cost. Adar, you've already got this tie-up with Codagenics, but are others speaking with you as well at this point in time?
Yes, we've also tried to make a vector vaccine using our measles Schwarz strains with a company called Themis in the United States, and that's probably about 3 or 4 months behind the Codagenics project. So we're firing both these barrels, which we, zeroed in on after a lot of conversations, and we hope to even put that candidate into animals very soon.
Okay, I understand that you've also tied up with a Berlin-based company. Adar, you want to take us through the details on that and what that could mean?
That's a slightly separate approach. The health community has been talking about the traditional BCG vaccine that a lot of people do make, including ourselves, that could help boost the immunity, general immunity, and that could also work toward fighting off COVID-19. So that's another school of thought. Trials are on for that. So a lot of trials are on for a lot of things, but nothing's been proven yet. And I was hearing from your earlier session that, hydrochloroquine and antiretrovirals and all these things are being prescribed. We really must be very cautious before taking these very powerful drugs, because they have side effects. And we must wait for the clinical trials to get over, even for these drugs to be used against COVID-19. They've been licensed for malaria and HIV and so many other things, but we really can't go out prescribing these drugs to treat COVID-19 unless we have actual clinical results in our hands. And I think that's also due in the next 2-3 months. A lot of people are doing those studies. So we must always, stay wary of that.
Absolutely, we should be wary, and please, no self-prescription, especially when it comes to these very powerful, potent drugs that we've been speaking of. Adar, we wish you the very best of luck as well. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Adar Poonawalla of Serum Institute. We'll take a break. Yes, go ahead.
Something which is very exclusive and new. We've always been battling with test kits, and I've just made an investment which closed about an hour ago. And this is an exclusive to CNBC that I'm giving and sharing the news first. that there's a company called My Labs. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's the only licensed, commercially licensed lab to make kits by the ICMR and NIV. And thanks to our investment, I'm happy to share that, making 1.5 lakh kits a week, which is the capacity at the moment, within the next 10 days, that's going to go to 2 million kits, which is 20 lakh kits from 1.5 lakh kits. So the shortage of kits for testing should very soon in the next month or two come to an end. And I think that's a significant development in this race toward quarantining and testing patients early.
It is a very significant development, and since you have decided to break the story here on CNBC, may I ask you how much you've decided to invest in My Labs?
That's confidential at the moment. We're not disclosing the figure and the nature. That's still being structured. But the investment is going to see through the next 1 year of expansion, where they're going to expand their factory in Lonavala, which is between Pune and Mumbai. So we're looking forward to that, and I'll disclose a little more information as soon as I can.
Okay, My Labs, of course, as Adar was pointing out, has got the ICMR's approval, the first Indian company to get that approval for test kits, and Serum Institute now making an investment, and of course, production will be scaled up here on. Thanks very much for joining us, Adar, and for that news break as well. Time now for us to head into a short break, but there appears to be another battle brewing between Shapoorji Pallonji Group and the Tata Sons. More on that when we get back. Now, banks have been offering a 3-month moratorium on term loan EMIs to help borrowers affected by the lockdown. However, customers availing the facility could also end up paying interest that could be in the multiples of their monthly payments. What should customers do in such a scenario? Lata joins us now to explain how the moratorium works on the back of the FAQs put out. Lata.
The word moratorium has not been understood, and it has led to a lot of misgivings. First of all, moratorium is not a waiver, as many of the bankers remind us. They also remind you that it doesn't mean that you have a 3-month holiday for EMIs and they get added at the end of your term. So it's not just a question of 3 more EMIs just to make up for the 3 less EMIs that I am not going to pay on April, May and June. The interest for these 3 EMIs will not just be paid later on in the year, it gets added to the principal. Now that is very different from just saying that the interest will be added at the end of the residual tenure. If it is added to the principal for the remaining part of the EMI period, the repayment period, you're paying on a higher principal. In technical terms, it means the interest is going to be capitalized, and therefore the longer the remaining part of your loan, the larger is the impact on the total amount that the borrower pays back. Now maybe if I put it in the table, you get a better idea. If your residual term of loan repayment is 36 months, that is 3 years of your home loan is left, then if you avail of the 3-month moratorium, you will logically be 36 plus 3, you should have 39 EMIs. But actually you will end up paying 40 EMIs because you get 1 EMI extra. Suppose you have 5 years of your home loan remainder, you are opting for the 3-month moratorium. It will not be 63. It will become 65 EMIs in the end. You have 2 extra EMIs because you are paying interest on a higher principal. Likewise, if it is a 10-year residual loan, you will end up getting 5 more EMIs. Of course, 3 for what you have skipped. If you have got 15 years left, then in the end, you will have 8 EMIs more than what you would otherwise have had if you didn't opt for the moratorium. 3, of course, are what you have not going to pay for April, May and June. And finally, if you have just taken a home loan, say in Jan or Feb, and you have 20 years left, then you will end up paying 15 EMIs more at the end of 20 years. That is, you will pay EMI for 21 years and 3 months, the last 3 months, of course, being the 3 months that you have skipped. So you should be very careful. If you are a person who's going to retire in 5 years and you have 15 years left, of service, then remember, after you retire, you will have a few more EMIs to pay. So accordingly, plan whether you want to take the moratorium or not, which is why every banker who came on the channel has been saying better not to opt for the moratorium if you are anyway salaried and your company is continuing to pay you your salary. The other things that you need to watch out for, some banks are assuming that by default you will opt for the moratorium. In that case, you better phone and tell them that I don't want to opt, if that will mean a higher cost that you're unwilling to bear. Others may assume that by default you are going to opt out of the moratorium because you have given an ECS deduct. So they will keep deducting. Unless you have a problem, then you have to phone in. So please make a note as to whether you are, which option your bank is opting for. The best thing would be is to call your relationship manager or call the bank or go on to their web page, where you will get a lot of instructions at a click. And while you do that, remember the tax implication as well. If you skip interest payment for April, May and June, although a little bit of the interest is added on for the remaining of the year, it is possible you may not be able to claim all the tax that you had calculated. So keep that also in mind.
All right, many thanks for working that out for us. So the message from bankers is clear. If you can pay your EMI, stick with the schedule, because it is going to mean higher interest at the end. Let's take a look at the other headlines that we're tracking tonight. GST